Hello everybody and welcome to another video project. This time it's gonna be a little different as we're going to be jumping into frameworks where, well, more specifically libraries, and we'll be making an application in React today. So to show you what I have in mind, I'll just minimize this, go to the app. So we have we'll have a couple of pages here, and we could toggle between them. We could come to the About page, see what's written here, come to the gallery, but of course it's locked, so we'll have to click this button to get in. This will simulate kind of like an authentication on the front end exclusively, as well, this is a new technology and I'd rather keep it simple, and instead of doing a full-fledged authentication, I was thinking about doing that some other day. Well, instead of this will simulate login, and clicking this button will simply log us in. Over here we'll have a gallery, and it takes a little while to load all the files as we're making API calls and loading this dynamically. Of course, if we click on any of these images, we will be taken to a different route here with its ID in the end, and the picture will be displayed with a different title. Clicking on the picture again would get us back to our, well, dashboard page, and clicking the Get Out button would, well, quote-unquote, unlog us from the application and get us back to the locked page, or this could be like /login or /signup. Alright, let's get to it. So right now I'm basically at the root of my YouTube projects folder, which is why you could see the app from the last time here, but I'll do something different. I'll go to my terminal, or control backtick, this built-in one here, and we will require node, npm, and npx for this project. So if you don't have node installed, you can check one of my previous videos where we install node and get npm with it as well. And if you have done that but still haven't installed any React projects, you could run the command npm install -g npx, which is a node package executioner, and as a global package it will be needed to execute the command to get us a boilerplate React project. Of course, I've been doing this for a while, so I have it installed, and now I'll run the application. The command npx create react app, and now we just have to give it a name. Let's do actually gallery tutorial. Press enter, and it's gonna take a little while, especially if you're running the command for the first time. But this will install React, React DOM, its scripts, the template, and everything else starting application needs to be executed and show some result on the browser. So I'll pause this for now, and I'll continue once the application is, well, the package is installed. So after a while of running in the background, this is the end result. And we get a nice little suggestion that tells us to enter the directory in which our project has been created, and simply run the npm start command, which will run the project. So let's get inside the project. Of course, I'll first open a new VS Code instance here so that we are completely in the project. Let's kill this one. And before starting the project and running the application, I'll install 3 packages which we will use in this project. Installing the packages is done with the Node Package Manager, and the command is npm install or just npm or just npmi for short. We're going to need Axios, then React Router DOM. Axios makes API requests. React Router DOM gives us access to the router and makes writing an application with multiple pages, well, easier to work with, let's just say. You can also make a so-called multi-page application with just React and not using the router, but that is not something I would like to do here. And the last package we're going to use is the styled components, which is a package that allows us to write CSS in JavaScript. So I'll pause until these install. The packages have installed. What's left to do here is run the npm start command and execute the project. Okay, yes. I'll open a card here next to it. This one is the completed project on localhost port 3000, and this one is the newly executed project we will be working on port 3001. And right off the bat, this is what a React project looks like. It's just a logo spinning around, a link to React documentation here, where I actually might end up using it in the video in the end, but this is your best friend for all things React. And this line here, edit source/app.js to save and reload. So let's do that. Source app.js is, let's collapse this down, is actually the initial component of the app. The entry point would be index.js, where we get an HTML element, a div. HTML file is here in the public directory. So we get this element here, and on top of it we append this, the React application, and behind the scenes React basically turns everything we type into pure JavaScript so it can be executed on the web. So there are a couple of things we'd like to remove from here. Let's just take this out. We're making a small application, so web vitals aren't that vital. And when it comes to these two CSS files, I'd like to condense them into one, as we will be using style components anyway, and the CSS will be written in JavaScript files. So I'll simply copy the CSS from the completed app, and I'll paste it in the app.css file here. From here we'll remove this one as well. Save. Now we can delete the index.css file without any errors. Logo, report web vitals, and setup tests. Now since we've also deleted the logo, we should probably remove it from here. And let's just write hello world here. Save. It looks fine for now, but instead of doing this, I would like to move my CSS into the index file here, so I wouldn't have to worry about that. Okay. So the application is basically clean and we can start working on it. Let's start with the pages we will need. So I'll create the pages folder and a couple of files inside. The most important one will be the index.js file, where we will import the default exports, as components are exported default by convention, and export them as named components here. Other than that, we'll have the about page, which is the simplest one of the application. It just contains some textual information. I'll actually write something down here. Let's just say h1 about. And I'll export the default. Select everything, copy. We'll also need a dashboard where we will have our gallery. Dashboard. Then we will need the locked page. Locked. We'll need the photo page to display a singular photo. And in the end, we'll need a not found page. Okay. We don't have to create our own not found page, but if we go to a page that isn't defined, nothing will be shown, and I simply think it's easier to show the user something, even if it is an error or a not found page, and give them some additional information to work with. Now I'll simply import everything here into the index file. Dashboard, locked, not found photo, and export them as named. Dashboard, locked, not found, and photo. So that's basically it. Whenever we need pages, we will require them from the pages directory directly. And the first thing we will have to do is set up our routes. So I'll import a couple of things, like browser router, routes, and route. These are from React router DOM. This is the router that initializes the router state. This thing holds multiple routes into a single, under a single parent, and this is just a singular route which executes a component when it's hit. So instead of all of this, let's use browser router, inside of which we will have routes. Oops. And a couple of routes here. Route. Now routes are written in the following type of way. So first of all, we have to specify whether we want this route to hit at the exact point, or just like if there's a slash about on the page and or in the browser here, the URL so to speak, and we have the exact path of slash about and an element here. If the application, or if the route is exact, it will only care about the URL being just this, but if it's not exact, the URL could be, for example, slash about slash something else, and it would still render the page, even though it's not the exact path. So we would like our element to be shown just on slash about and nothing else. So this is what we're going to get. Another route with the exact path of just a slash will be our dashboard here, and we have to execute it like this and close the route, of course. Then we have the locked. This will be locked. The next one we have is a photo. That's gonna be slash photos slash ID. I'll talk more in depth about this later once we get to the API. This will be photo, and the last one is not found. Now, not found is supposed to be a wildcard covering everything else that isn't specified here, so I will remove both the exact and the path attributes from it, which basically means that it'll get executed if all these cases fail here. Save and come here. Now, since we're on the slash page, or there's nothing here, in other words, we're getting the slash value. But if we go to slash about, we'll get about. If we go to slash photos slash 1, we'll get a photo. This is the colon ID. And if I go to locked, first things first, let's get to the getting button on the locked screen. So to do that, let's go back to our code first and start working on the locked page. The locked page is generally fairly simple. It's supposed to have just a button that, when clicked, moves us to a different page. In this case, the button is clearly centered to like the middle of the screen. So we'll create a styled folder where we will keep all of our styled components. So let's create a file called full page center. JSX, and use style components. So as a package, first we have to import styled from style components. Of course, I've been using it so much that I actually made my own snippet for this, just IS. For a refresher on snippets, you can watch that video where I talked about it. So in order to have everything centralized. We will need a height of 100 viewport height, a width of 100 viewport width, a display of grid, and a place items of center. Okay, save this. Oh, right. Export default full page center. And let's put it here. Export. And we'll create another file for the buttons. I'll call the file lockbuttons.jsx. We'll have two variables here, the lock button and the unlock button. So for the button, we want a padding of 1 rem top and bottom. That's 32 pixels in total, and 2.5 rem to the sides, which is, I think, 80 completely. Background color of green, because we want to be let in this case. The color of white, no border to remove that horrible button border. It starts with, by default, border radius of 0.5 rem to cut the corners a little bit, make it nicer to look at. Cursor pointer to give us a clicker. Transition of all 250 milliseconds ease. And now we will be selecting certain states on the element. To do that, to refer to the element itself, just use ampersand and then whatever state you want to focus on. In this case, we'll use hover and change the background color to dark green and the color to this slightly darker shade of white. And on focus, we want to remove the outline. We'll do basically the same thing for the other button, except for the color, in which case it's gonna be red and dark red. We'll export these two. And we'll import them here. Lock buttons. And I'll add them to the end here. Now inside of the locked component, we'll simply import the full page center and the locked button as well. Actually, let's write our text, get in, and save. If we go to our locked page, this is how it looks for now. On-click the button does nothing, but we'll fix that soon. So let's actually create some state for that. Now, since this is supposed to be shared across the entire application, there's a concept in React called a context, and the context is basically some pieces of maybe critical, but not necessarily the most critical data which can be shared between components in a simple way. And we'll create one of those, so context and user context. This will make way more sense when we actually integrate it in code, but for now let's just create a context. It'll be called user context, and we'll import this method or function from React. And the other thing we have to export is the provider function. This is a user context, and this is the provider for it. It takes props, but the most important prop here is children, which are the elements found as, well, children of the provider, would be the parent. We'll use simple useState here. And state in React is basically a piece of data that is controlled by the React component to which it reacts. So, in other words, if we have this isUser variable, which is set to false, the browser will display everything as it's supposed to, according to its, well, to the code and to the conditions written in it. But if this variable changes its value from false to true, the React will force a re-render, and the application, the entire page will re-render and change itself according to the conditions in the code. So this might sound a bit more difficult and confusing when I'm talking about it. So let's write the code and see it in action. So we have to pass a value to the context, and it'll be these two variables that we have declared right here, and the children will go here. So we can save this and we can exit from this file. Now we can go back to our locked component here and actually do some work. So we'll get both of these variables that we have already set. Use context, user context. All right. Well, let's just import this context / user context. I was expecting autocomplete, but I'm not getting it because I forgot to integrate the context into the application. So before everything else, let's just go back to the index.js file and import the user provider into here. The way to use the context is to simply wrap whatever we want to inside of it. And now the entire app component, as well as all of its children, will have access to isUser and set isUser variables in this manner. So now that we have those two variables, we can create a function, call it letUserIn. It takes nothing as parameters. It simply sets the isUser to true, no matter what the previous value is, although it can only be true or false, so doesn't matter very much, and we would like to navigate to the slash route or the dashboard component, but we will need to get the use navigate hook from React router DOM so that we could call this function and change the route. That's basically it. On click, let user in. Okay. So I think that's that for the locked part. We actually won't need the isUser. So let's save and go here. And if I click, yeah, I get to the dashboard. Nice. Another important thing on web applications is definitely orientation. So let's create a components folder with a couple of components. The most important one will be navigation, and we'll have two more well, all-encompassing components. One will be the private route, which is whose job will basically be to check whether the user is set or isn't on the true-false variable, and if it is, allow the user to visit the dashboard page and the single photo page as well, and if not, just re-navigate them to locked. The about page will be consistently accessible to both types of users, but the dashboard and the single photo page could only be accessed if the isUser variable is true in the context. So, quote unquote, simulating a logged in user to see their own gallery. So first let's create the private route component here and import the navigate from React router DOM, use context, which will be important, and user context. Private route. It'll take children as a prop, as we will be passing an element inside of it directly. So the first thing we'll do is get the isUser variable from the context, and if there is no user, we will return the navigate component to the slash locked page. Oops. Okay. Otherwise, we will return children. Oh, we are supposed to replace the value, the slash with the slash locked, not just add another history entry on top of it. So a replacement is necessary. Else we will get the routes we're going for. Okay, so private route is done. We'll also need a spinner component, which will simply be used to show the user that the data is still loading. So I've made my own styled spinner, and I'll simply paste the styles here. Styled spinner. And I'll import it here and export it like this. And in the spinner component, we will simply import the styled spinner and create the spinner. Oops. Okay. Export default. I'll simply import private route here and spinner as well and export them. Now that we have the private route, we could go to the app.js and get the private route here. And now all that is left to do is wrap some variables in here. So let's move these two. So like this. The dashboard will be the children value. And here, that'll be the photo. Okay. So that's all we need. Checking the page and refreshing takes us to locked. Now if I click here, I change the variable value and I'm led inside the dashboard page. But if I refresh again, it resets to false. And I'm forcefully returned to the lock page. Yeah. So everything seems to be working fine for now. Let's work on the navigation. So before everything, we need to have an idea about how it will look like. So let's write some code. We will of course need the navigate from the use navigate. Oops. Okay. I don't know what this was. Or use navigate from React Router DOM. We will also need the context as well, with both values this time. Use context, user context. I really don't know what's happening here. I'll have to import it on my own. Context, user context. Okay. And the last thing we will need is two functions. One will be getOut, one will be getIn. I realize that there's a slight duplication with this here and the locked button. We could have actually done the entire thing in, I would say, the context, as well as these two functions, and put them here in value as well, and get them like that. But let's keep it simple for now. This thing is going to set the user to false this time and navigate to the /locked. The other one's gonna do the exact opposite, set to true and navigate to the /page. The next thing we are to do is write the skeletal structure. We'll use the link element here. Link. This will act like our very own brand logo. And on the other side, we'll have an unordered list with 3 list items. each of which has a link tag. Okay, so the first one will again go to gallery. The second one will go to the about page. About. And my apologies, this isn't a link, but actually a button. And in this case, we'll simply check whether is user. And if user is, we will do the unlocked button with the text get out. Otherwise, we will get a locked button with the text of get in. Nope, we're not getting the imports. So unlocked button from styled, as well as the locked button. Now on click we'll execute the get out function here. Otherwise we'll use the get in function here. So that's it with the navigation. Simply copy this line down and put it here as well. Let's check whether the errors. Okay, we do get the errors. It's a good practice to keep this console here slightly open just in case, to see if we could catch some errors. Now the navigation bar is a bit more tricky to implement. That's because it should be able to show up on all pages regardless of whether the user is logged in or not. Just changing this thing on that condition and nothing else. So we will keep the navigation outside of these routes, and we'll keep it above everything by rendering the navigation here. Compile successfully and gives us this. Fortunately, not what we were interested in, so let's go to styled and create our own file. Here we'll make a file called navigation.jsx, get the styled, and get the navigation component, styled.nav. So the most important thing we can do here is display this as flex and justify content space between. So this value here and this value here would be found on the completely opposite sides of the screen. Now let's target the so-called logo, this one here. Links are basically anchor tags, but for React. Anchor tags usually refresh the page when clicked, but these links don't do such a thing. They simply move us to a different page, and this is why people generally prefer to use the frameworks or libraries rather than writing in vanilla technologies, so to speak. So we'll simply make the so-called logo larger and a different color, but when it comes to the unordered list, we'd like to display this flex, align the items in the middle, give them a complete height of the parent, and remove the bullet points from the list. Now, targeting the list item itself and the link inside of it, I'll simply copy some styles from the other screen, and I believe that's that. This is just to make this thing look more presentable. Again, the whole thing. Navigation. Here. Here. And here. Now if we take a look at the page, now it's starting to look more like it. If I tab over, actually let's close this. If I tab over, there doesn't seem to be much of a, or any difference at all. Except that we actually get data here while we don't get anything here. Now, with that being the only remaining issue, let's tackle the API requests. Now let's go over to the dashboard and start working. But actually before that, we will need a way to actually make an API request, get the data we want, and if anything happens to fail, we would also like to get the error message as well. And for all of that time, the browser should be in the is loading state. And once we get some of the data, the browser should stop loading, or the page should stop loading rather, and display either the data or the error we have managed to come across on the way. So to do that, we will create a hook in the hooks folder, and we'll call it use photos.js. So hooks are basically simple JavaScript functions and nothing more. And we can use them to isolate the reusable part of the code from a functional component. And given the fact that we've been using functional components this whole time, hooks would be the perfect solution to our problem. So what we want is to get some variables by just invoking a single line of code in the component, but keeping the bulk of the logic isolated. So we'll do it here. Hooks follow a naming convention in that they generally start with a lowercase use and then whatever else we want. And they're so common, in fact, that we've been using them in other constructs, such as here, the user context, where we use the useState, which is also a hook from React. So before we write the hook, we'll need to import Axios and the other two hooks we will be using. Use photos. It'll take two parameters, the ID, which will be null, and the limit, which will be, let's just say 60 or 64 to make it more binaryable, I guess. Let's declare 4 states here. So we will need an array of all the photos, and it'll initialize itself as an empty array. We'll also need a singular photo, which would be an empty object, or better yet, a null. Then we'll need the error, set error. It'll also be initialized as null, and is loading and set is loading, which by default should start from true, and we should get the spinner before we get the data. Now I'll create a function to get the data, and we'll get the URL in the following way. So we can pass the ID here, and we'll check for that first. So if it's not a number, after we parse the integer, we'll get the following URL. So if it's not a number, we'll get this. Otherwise, we'll use this line of code here. This is basically the URLs we have to use for in order to for the code to work. We're using a third-party API, and JSON placeholder type code is generally used, well, for these purposes, for purposes of illustration or something. They're not meant to be used in actual applications. So we'll need an async function to do the API call. We will simply await axios.get, and we'll pass it the URL we have here. And now we'll check if the data we got back is an array. We'll simply set the photos to it. Otherwise, we'll set a singular photo to it. Now, given the fact that this is an async function, we will have to wrap all of this in a try-catch block. So this is a try block. Catch will simply, well, set the error to the error we get here. And there's also one more clause in the try catch we could use, and that's the finally clause. And finally, we would like to set is loading to false, regardless of whether we got the error or not. Okay? So this is the get data function completed. Now use effect will be another hook we're using. We'll get data here. And this second parameter, the array with the ID here, it simply is a dependency array. And what that means is that this function here will get executed every time this variable here changes. We could have actually used different variables, but this one tends to work and give us exactly what we want. So I would say that's the correct solution here. Now we'll simply return all of these variables without their setters, because everything's being set here. And I'll simply export this as default. Use photos. Okay, save this. Now we can go to our dashboard and actually start working on it. So first of all, we're gonna get the photos error and is loading from the use photos here. We won't be passing any variables like ID or limit, because I believe the limit of 64 is quite nice. Not too massive for the browser or the machine to handle, but not very small and simple in that we have a barren page. So now we're gonna use a couple of ternaries here. So is loading, and if the page is loading, we would like the full page center and the spinner inside of it. Otherwise, well, actually let's break this into a new line. Otherwise, if it is error, we'd like to have some text here to warn the user, and it'll be this one. And in the last case, we'll have a section, meaning we have all of the values we want. Let me just import my styled variables here from /styled full yeah, and the spinner is in components, let's say from components. Okay, photos error. Okay, so what else we're gonna need before everything is a title here? Let's say dashboard gallery, and now we're gonna map through all of the photos, and we're actually gonna create a specific component for this map here, and I'll call it a photo item, and it'll take a photo. We'll use a navigate here because it's clickable. We'll simply extract some variables from the object and return this, an image with like cursor pointer, and on click it'll take us to a page for a single photo. So now we can come down here and for each photo return a photo item. Each of these elements has to have a key because we're doing a loop, and each of these items has a photo ID, and we'll pass in the entire photo. Okay, everything looks nice. Actually, this doesn't. It should be like this. Now it looks nice. Okay. Now that let's get out first and refresh this. Now if we click get in, we actually get the values to load, and clicking on one of these takes us to its appropriate URL. So this is working nicely, but aside from this, I really don't like the styles. So let's go to the style component and create a file called gallery.jsx, in which we will keep our, well, all the pictures in the gallery. Style.div, a display of flex flow of row wrap, and justify content of center, export default gallery, and we will import it here. Okay, and there's another value or style we would like to do, and that's the central title, and this will be an h2 with these properties, and I'll also pass it here as well, saving this. I'm saving this. Now if I come to the dashboard component, instead of this section here, simply get my gallery and use it here, and I'll get my central title and I'll use it instead of this h2 here. So I'll save that and compiled with error. Style is not defined. Oh, obviously. Okay, now everything's good. Okay, getting in here also gets the spinner to work, but let's check the functionality of the spinner a little bit better. Okay, first let's get here and throttle the web by going to slow 3G. This will slow the speed of the internet enough so that we could observe the spinner for longer. And I'm fairly satisfied with how it works, so I'll close the throttle. And the last thing left to do is click here and finish this page up. Now, before we go to the singular photo display, let's finally work on the about and the not found pages. So I will actually import style here, because about is usually a self-contained component, so doing this really isn't that scary. .div. So we'll text align this on the center, and we'll go into the h2. That'll be its child, its direct child, and we'll give it a larger font size. Let's just say font size of 2.75 rem. This should be nice. I'll simply copy and paste my about component from the other screen. This should be perfectly fine. I haven't completed the not found component on the other screen, so I'll do it right now. We'll actually get the full page center here, and let's wrap it like this. And let's give it some div here with a larger font size of 1.85 rem. Oops, 1.85. Say, oops, looks like that page doesn't exist. And below here we'll have I would say a link, which I will have to import from React Router DOM to slash, say, go back instead. Okay, the not found page is done, and let's test it. Come over here, write something that doesn't exist. All right, we didn't implement it. So simply to implement the page, just come here, and I forgot that we were supposed to put the asterisk here, which is basically a wildcard, and it's meant to catch every other route that isn't anything above it. So doing this, coming here, pressing enter, we get the content here and the go back instead link. Clicking here takes us to the gallery dashboard, but of course, since we're locked, it simply kicks us to the locked page. Clicking here gets us to the gallery. Okay, now we can work on the photo. So the photo component isn't that complex in and of itself. There's a couple of things left to do. First of all, let's get the navigate here. Okay. Now we'll also need the ID from the page or the URL, but this lives in the use params hook, params, which would be all the parameters from here. I have the anatomy of the URL video you could check on my channel, but instead of just the ID being there, we could also have a hash here with some value after it, in which case this would also be found in the use params hook, but in this case it's much more simplified. We also need the singular photo, actually just the one, this, the error, and the is loading like we did in the dashboard page. Okay, this isn't showing up, so import use photos from hooks slash, actually this is a default export, so like this. Okay, here we will pass the ID, so we're getting a singular value, and we'll do a similar thing that we did in the dashboard page. So on is loading, we want the full page center and the spinner inside of it. Oops. Otherwise, on error, we want the error we had on the dashboard page. And in the last case, we will need the section. Okay. Let's get here and get the central title. Photo with an ID of ID. Don't worry about this syntax highlighting. I have font ligatures installed and it's doing some fun stuff like this. So after that, we're gonna need a div which is centralized, but I'll do this inline since it's not much. And like we did with the photo item, we just have to render this out. Let's make it a bit bigger with the photo.url and the photo.title. It's a pointer again, but this time it navigates us back to the main page that we came from. Now let's import all of this stuff. So central title and full page center are from styled, and the spinner is from components. So saving this should hopefully work, and apparently it does. Clicking here. The spinner also works fine. The about page is kind of barren, but it is what it is. Oh yeah, I should definitely fix this. So let's go to the navigation page, or component rather, and do this. Okay. It'll now take us exactly where we're supposed to go. So slash, then about, and the locked are the only pages we should have in the navigation. This button should change regardless of whether we're in or out. And the /ID page should only be accessible through the dashboard. So all in all, this is basically a completed application. So, oh yeah, one more thing. We're getting this warning here from React hooks, and it's about use effect in the usephotos.js. So one of the reasons this happens is because use effect as a hook is quite a bit different than, let's say, useState, and we'll execute this every time this changes, but it was expecting this thing as a dependency as well. That would be very wrong. So in order to fix this and remove the warning, I could write the ESLint disable next line as a comment, as a specific comment for the linter, and if I save this, it'll be compiled successfully. I generally really dislike having even one warning in the console. I don't know, I think it's just a personality thing, but I feel much more accomplished and successful when the console is completely green. All in all, that's basically the entirety of the application. Thank you for watching and have an amazing day.